Good afternoon, I'm Deb Morgan and I'm delighted to welcome you all to the fourth CADO webinar of this year. I'm really pleased this afternoon to welcome two colleagues from Northumbria University, Gemma Wilson and Jess Gates, who I've been working with for the last 12 months or so on a project that they're going to tell you about. So I'm not going to talk any longer. I'm going to hand over to Gemma and Jess. And if you could keep questions till later, pop them in the question box in your control panel and we will come to questions after the presentation. Thanks. I'll hand over to you now, Gemma.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you so much for CADO to hosting us today, and thank you for joining us as well. So today we're going to be talking a lot about our research project, which is called Aging in a Digital World, and specifically focusing on the use of technology for social connection. So this research project started back in January 2019, and it was funded by the British Academy and Leverhulme Small Grants Research Fund. So as Deb said, Jess and I are going to be co-presenting this webinar today, and we're part of a large research team. So I am a senior research fellow in applied health and chartered health psychologist from Northumbria University and leading this project. And Jessica Gates is a research assistant on this project and also a PhD researcher as well. We have Deborah Morgan, who's kindly chairing the session today, and Deborah is a senior research officer at Swansea University. And finally, Dr. Santosh Vijaykumar, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Psychology at Northumbria University. And he's not with us on the webinar today. Santosh is a health and risk communication specialist, and he's also our resident statistician. So he was very valuable in phase 2 of the research, and our stats guru on that. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, I'm initially going to be providing a brief overview of the background literature, specifically looking at loneliness and social isolation, and then loneliness, social isolation and technology use, before looking a little bit at digital exclusion and the digital divide as well. Jess is then going to introduce phase 1 of our project, looking at the method and the findings of phase 1. And then I'll introduce a little bit about phase 2 of our project. Now, unfortunately, at this stage, we don't have the findings from phase 2 yet, but I want to still give you an overview of the method that we used and how phase 1 informed the second phase of our project as well. And finally, we'll be describing a little bit about the implications of our findings, looking at the conclusions, looking at digital inclusivity, a little bit about future research and the limitations of our study, and also touching on COVID as well and how our findings relate to what's going on at the minute. So getting straight into the literature, we know that social connection is a vital part of healthy aging, and it helps to promote our quality of life. The importance of social connection, and therefore the importance of loneliness and social isolation, have been really reflected in international and national policy changes and commissioning over the last few years. For example, in 2018, the UK appointed the First Minister for Loneliness, and alongside this appointment developed a loneliness strategy as well. And as well as governmental action, you know, we have a lot of different national organisations that focus specifically on loneliness. You know, we have the Campaign to End Loneliness, there's the Joe Cox Commission, there's the Co-op and Red Cross Alliance as well. So I think it really shows kind of the importance of loneliness as a public health priority. And we know that loneliness has so many physical and psychological health consequences. So loneliness can, you know, increase blood pressure, lead to cognitive decline, depression, as well as mortality as well. So we know how important it is to focus on loneliness and on social isolation as well. One of the issues in this area is that loneliness and social isolation are often considered as being the same thing. People can often kind of talk about these concepts interchangeably or wrongly describe themselves as being lonely or being social isolated when they mean the other. So in this webinar and in this research project, we are describing loneliness as being a subjective experience in which there is an unpleasant emotional response to a perceived discrepancy between the number or quality of relationships a person desires and the relationships that they have. So loneliness is very subjective, it's very personal, And we often hear the term being lonely in a crowded room. You know, it's not about the social network, it's not about the social connections, the frequency or proximity of those social connections, but how an individual feels about those social connections. And on the other hand, social isolation is characterized as being an objective state, which considers the integration of an individual in their social environment, such as the frequency and proximity of these social relationships and these social networks as well. So they are two very different concepts. And there's no direct link between loneliness and social isolation, but an individual can experience both loneliness and social isolation at the same time. So an individual can be, both lonely and socially isolated. They can feel lonely but not socially isolated, or socially isolated but not lonely. And of course, an individual can feel neither of these things. And we often hear about the term kind of solitude and being happy and content with being alone. I think one of the myths as well around loneliness and social isolation is that it's a part of aging. We often talk about aging and loneliness together, and it's far from being an inevitable part of aging. And we know, in fact, that loneliness is very much prevalent throughout the life course, particularly in transitionary periods, such as motherhood, when someone has a baby. We know that things like changes in employment, whether that's retirement, whether that's losing a job, or in fact at the minute, with COVID and we're now working from home. And it can also be in relationship changes as well. But aging, there are factors related to aging that can make an individual more vulnerable to loneliness. And, specifically, as I mentioned, retirement and also bereavement as well. So technology is one tool that can facilitate social connection. And with rapid technological change, technology is often considered as an intervention to alleviate levels of loneliness, to reduce loneliness and reduce social isolation as well. There are a number of different digital devices that can be used for social connection. We have the obvious things like smartphones, tablets, laptops, but we even have newer pieces of technology such as smart watches or smart speakers as well. And there are also a whole host of social media sites, text messaging facilities, video conferencing facilities that can all promote social connection with other people. Evidence also shows that for older people, keeping in touch with friends and family is often one of the motivations for using technology, and also one of the reasons for maintaining that use of technology as well. But the evidence is quite contradictory around the impact of technology on loneliness and on alleviating loneliness. So some evidence supports the use of technology in reducing loneliness through things like increased social support, social connectedness, and reductions in social isolation as well. But on the other hand, a lot of the research shows that technology has no effect on levels of reported loneliness. So this evidence at the minute just isn't there to support the use of technology and specifically to alleviate loneliness. In a theoretical model that was outlined in a review in 2018, describes the relationship between loneliness and technology as being both bidirectional and dynamic. The authors describe how there are variants in the outcome of technology use on loneliness. And these variants in the impact of technology use on loneliness are dependent on how someone uses technology. It's not quite as easy, not quite as simple as somebody using technology and loneliness reduces or loneliness increases. It depends very much on the type of use of this technology. So they used two hypotheses to explain this dynamic relationship between technology use and loneliness. The first one being the displacement hypothesis. And in the displacement hypothesis, authors describe the use of technology as displacing offline relationships with online relationships. So it's that withdrawal away from social activities offline, social relationships offline, to being predominantly online. And what the review describes is that people that use technology in this way, through social withdrawal and displacing those offline relationships with online relationships, are more likely to experience increased levels of loneliness. And on the other hand, there's the stimulation hypothesis. So what's described within this is people using technology as a way of enhancing their offline relationships. So rather than displacing those offline social connections, those offline relationships with online relationships, they actually using technology to enhance and facilitate those offline relationships through technology use. And what the authors of the review in 2018 describe is that people that use technology in this way are more likely to experience reduced levels of loneliness through the use of technology. The authors, interestingly, also looked at age-related differences within these two hypotheses and how people use technology. And despite the contradictory evidence that I described on the previous slide, the authors found that older adults are more likely to use technology as a way of stimulating their enhancing their existing offline relationship, as opposed to displacing those offline relationships. So in that respect, what the authors are proposing that older adults using technology on the whole would experience reduced levels of loneliness through this stimulation hypothesis, through this enhancement of offline relationships. So when considering technology as an intervention tool to either improve social connections, reduce levels of loneliness, we've got to consider the evidence base, which is contradictory. But what we've also got to consider as well is the digital divide, and looking at those people who can't access technology or choose not to use technology as well. So when we describe the digital divide, we're describing the gap that exists between those that can use technology and those can't use technology, those that are digitally included and those that are digitally excluded. And we know that there are three different levels to this digital divide. The digital divide isn't simply a case of having access to technology or not. Access is the first level of the digital divide. So does an individual have access to broadband, to the internet, to digital devices such as smartphones, tablets, and also to social media sites, text messaging facilities, video conferencing facilities, for example. The second level of the digital divide is around digital skills and usage. So an individual may have access to this technology, but do they have the skills to be able to use this technology? The skills to be able to use, initiate and use broadband, digital devices, and varying different social media sites as well. And the third level of this digital divide is around the kind of understanding of the tangible benefits that an individual can have offline. So what can the internet, what can social media and technology bring to your life, and how can it enhance your life offline as well? So in this case, today when we're talking about social connection, of course there are potential social benefits that can be beneficial from using technology, but there can also be financial benefits and educational benefits, various different benefits from using this technology. But that's an important aspect around digital exclusion. In terms of older adults, there's been a notable increase in older adults using the internet and using social media across the last decade. So year on year, particularly in the UK, Europe, USA, there are rising numbers of older adults using the internet. But we still know that there is a gap between older generations and younger generations in internet use and social media use as well. So, for example, the Office for National Statistics in 2018 showed stats in which 27% of older people over 65 years old were using social media, as opposed to 96% of 16 to 24-year-olds. So despite the continuing rise of older adults using the internet, a gap still exists between the older generations and younger generations in technology, in internet and social media use as well. But age is only one factor that can increase the likelihood of digital exclusion, and there are multiple other factors that do increase this likelihood. For example, socioeconomic status, education level, gender, with females being more digitally excluded than males typically, as well as health status and disability. So there are a number of different things that we've got to consider when we discuss digital exclusion. So looking at our project now, this study, as I say, began back in January 2019, and we aim to explore older adults' experiences of using technology, which includes both digital devices and also social media, as a way to connect with others. Specifically, we wanted to understand the motivations and preferences towards using digital devices and social media as a way to connect with other people. We wanted to look at the impact of self-reported loneliness or social isolation on both the motivations and preferences towards using digital devices and social media. We wanted to look at the factors that enable or prevent older adults from accessing or using digital devices and social media to connect with others. And we also wanted to look at the impact of self-reported loneliness or social isolation in enabling or preventing older adults from accessing or using digital devices and social media. So I'm now going to pass over to Jess, who's going to take you through phase 1 of our research study.
Thanks, Gemma. So what do we do to address these aims? We designed a mixed method study which has 2 phases. We adopted an exploratory sequential design whereby themes from phase 1 inform the development of phase 2. During phase 1, we collected qualitative data using semi-structured interviews. We interviewed 20 participants who were aged 65 or over and were currently using digital devices or social media to connect with others. So we conducted interviews either face-to-face or over the phone, depending on participant preference and the location of the participant. We wanted to explore their perspectives on technology use and develop insights into the motivations, facilitators, barriers, and general experiences of using technology. To achieve this, we talked about how they use technology to connect with family and friends. We talked about their early experiences of using technology and who instigated their use of using technology. We also discussed their feelings around technology use and the comparisons with face-to-face communication. We asked our participants to reflect on if and how technology has changed the way they communicate with others. We then analysed our interview data using thematic analysis, and we adhered to the 6 steps set out by Braun and Clark. For those not familiar with these steps, they are: number 1, familiarising yourself with the data; number 2, generating initial codes; number 3, searching for themes; number 4, reviewing the themes; number 5, defining and naming the themes; and number 6, producing the report. So 2 broad themes were generated from the qualitative data, and each of these has their own set of sub-themes. The first is technology as a tool for social engagement, and the second is facilitators and barriers of technology use. I'll now go through each of these themes and sub-themes, and I'll present a number of quotes from our participants on the screen, and I'll talk around what these quotes mean in the context of our research. The first theme is technology as a tool for social engagement. And the first sub-theme within this is technology as a connector. Individuals discuss the benefits of technology for social connection, particularly as a way of connecting with family and friends living geographically dispersed and for those living abroad. The use of online communication also increased the frequency of communication with family and friends. Most participants use social media as a way of maintaining meaningful relationships, and these are with their existing circle of family and friends, as opposed to conversing with people they didn't know or without reason. One participant, who was a carer, described himself as almost housebound and used social media frequently. This was the only opportunity he had to connect with others. Despite the benefits of using technology to connect with others, it wasn't always perceived as being optional, and using technology to communicate with others was now a necessity. Individuals reflected on the negative consequences for peers without digital skills or without access to digital devices. With one participant summarising this perfectly by saying, "There are those that can and those that can't." Generally, technology was perceived as a connector, and those who do not use technology could be left out. However, some individuals did acknowledge how technology itself could be isolating. Overall, though, online communication was perceived as being a positive tool to allow individuals to connect with their family and friends and maintain relationships. So the next sub-theme is the importance of the visual. Participants described online communication as being a method of keeping in touch with one another when face-to-face communication wasn't possible. Visual communication via video calling apps or sharing photographs was the mode of online communication more similar to being there in person. Participants described really getting a sense of knowing how someone was feeling when being able to see them, and connecting with that person on a deeper level than perhaps with the telephone or other online communication tools. Visual communication was also perceived as being important for the family, with one participant describing it as a way for grandchildren not to forget about their grandparents. Some participants were quite passive in their communication style. The way in which most individuals actively shared photographs was in showing or sending photographs of their relatives to other people, rather than taking and sending photos themselves. While many think visual communications are important in remaining connected, one participant, however, described the negative consequences of video calling. She reflected on the confusion her young granddaughter faced, since she gets very upset because she can see you, but she can't touch you. Another downside to video calling was apprehension around their own appearance and body image. Overall, online visual communication was valued by participants as being most like face-to-face communication, although there were some drawbacks to using video calling apps and sending photographs. The next theme is technology as supplementary rather than a replacement. Many participants felt that technology was a useful tool to keep up to date with others, but it did not replicate spending time with one another. Participants described technology as just a tool and as a shortcut when you need it. Some felt that online and telephone communication was more so a method of checking up on one another, rather than having an actual conversation. One of the most striking issues when discussing the replacement of face-to-face communication with technology was the perceived differences across generations. Many participants noted different views across their family, with one participant commenting that, "I find sometimes you'll get a text message when a phone call would have been nicer." The decision to communicate online was often as they felt it was less intrusive, particularly when their families led busy lives and may not have time to talk to them. Individuals overwhelmingly preferred face-to-face communication and perceived online communication as a supplementary tool to maintain relationships, rather than as a way of replicating other forms of communication. So the next main theme is facilitators and barriers to technology use. And the first sub-theme within this is perceived self-efficacy. Some participants experience low confidence when using technology to connect with others, perceiving themselves as being novices and not technology-minded, and some lacked patience with the technology. Interestingly, this arose as a theme, despite all participants being regular users of devices and social media. In many cases, participants had multiple devices and engaged with a variety of social media platforms. Yet, they still perceive themselves as beginners or novices, with one participant describing how rapid changes in tech make them feel left behind. Higher levels of self-efficacy were often related to early technology adoption. Some participants talked about how they had used technology in their workplace and expressed how being familiar with certain elements had a positive impact on current use. This was supported by participants who experienced low levels of self-efficacy and didn't consider themselves as being early adopters. The participants considered their own low levels of self-efficacy and a lack of familiarity with technology as being age-dependent. Individuals considered their peers and those older than them as having lower levels of understanding and lacking experience in using technology. There was some consideration of the participants' own aging and its potential to impact their own future use of technology. Aging was considered by the participants as being detrimental to technology use. Again, it's important to remember here that our participants were regular technology users, yet low confidence and concerns around their own age persisted. And the next sub-theme we've got is fear. So some participants were fearful when using devices and social media. They were often worried about breaking them or doing something wrong. Fear was also experienced in respect of privacy, and this impacted their use of social media. They often had concerns when posting information on social media sites. There was also fear surrounding security and being hacked when using social media sites, but also in using the internet more generally. While these concerns impacted internet use for some, others used workaround strategies to confront these issues. Even for the individuals in this study who used devices and social media, fear still had an influence on their use of technology. And the next sub-theme is culture and communication. Cultural differences around communication impacted the way older adults use social media and impacted on their online communications. They worried about how they'd come across using social media or didn't like the way others communicated online. Some participants were more active and others were more passive users of social media. But even those actively posting on social media were cautious of what they posted and preferred more direct forms of online communication with family and friends for more private matters. Participants also discussed their moral attitudes online, and this included fear of miscommunication that wouldn't necessarily occur offline. The next sub-theme is social capital. So when we use the term social capital, we think of this as a social network with valuable benefits. For example, in our study, existing social networks supported individuals to become familiar with devices and social media. And individuals really benefited from having a network of friends and family to support them in becoming familiar with their new devices. However, the influence of social capital didn't end at this point. It was also important for ongoing support and maintenance of using devices and social media. For many participants, their technology use was initiated by others. For some, they hadn't used devices before being introduced to them through family members and occasionally friends who bought the devices for them or supported them to get started. Family members also introduced individuals to or physically set up social media platforms and text messaging apps. This was often for the purpose of connecting them to their family. One individual described how she felt pressured into using social media by her daughter, so it was the only way she could stay in communication with her while she was on holiday. The importance of an individual's social network didn't end at the technology initiation. Participants often also relied on their social networks when learning something new or if they experienced technical issues. Individuals often asked family members for help when they were not familiar with a device or a social media platform, and they didn't want to use it without their support. Some participants described accessing tech support from other sources, such as high street shops or using the library services when they had trouble with their devices. Not everyone relied on others though, and some individuals did feel like they had the skills to help themselves, and some were able to help others with their technical problems. There was also concern when forecasting their own use of technology without continued support from their family. This future loss of social capital was perceived as having an impact on future technology use, and therefore possibly losing opportunities currently held. So to summarise, existing social capital was of great importance for continued use of technology. Individuals often relied on members of their own family, perhaps with more knowledge and experience of technology than them, to support them from initial setup, as well as when learning something new, or when dealing with a technical issue. And the final sub-theme here is physical functioning. We found there are a number of physical barriers experienced when using digital devices or social media apps. These physical barriers were typically issues with eyesight or persistent pain. This impacted the digital device they chose to use, and individuals often chose larger devices, such as a tablet over a smartphone, due to the size of the screen. Persistent pain, particularly in the fingers and wrists, was also a problem and impacted the way in which individuals use technology. Individuals with persistent pain also chose larger devices due to the size and accessibility of the buttons. So you can see there are a number of physical barriers which had some sway on the device purchased and how they could actually use these devices. I'd just like to recap these findings and go back to this initial table of themes. So I've talked about our main theme, technology is a tool for social engagement, and went into a bit of detail about each of these sub-themes and presented you with a number of quotes from our participants. I've also covered our second main theme, facilitators and barriers of technology use, and discussed each of these elements. Hopefully you can see that what emerged from our conversation with these participants was that technology was overwhelmingly viewed as a positive thing. However, participants viewed tech as simply a tool and a way to contact with family and friends when they can't meet up in person. Our participants also discussed a number of things that facilitated them to engage with technology and a number of barriers they faced on their journey so far. There's huge value in having this information, especially when thinking about using technology as a method of tackling social isolation and loneliness. It's important that we design interventions that address these problems head on. So now I'm going to hand you back over to Gemma, and she's going to talk a little bit about phase 2 of our study, as well as what these findings mean.
Thanks, Jess. So in keeping with the sequential design that Jess mentioned, our study followed. The findings from phase 1 informed the development of an online survey for phase 2. So specifically the themes and sub-themes that Jess has just described led us to use specific validated skills for our online survey. And this survey was disseminated across the UK using Qualtrics. And many of you may have heard of or have used Qualtrics in the past, but Qualtrics is an online survey development tool. And an individual can develop their own survey using Qualtrics, they can distribute it, see and analyse the data themselves. But in this project, we also worked directly with Qualtrics, who supported us in disseminating that survey. So to do that, they sent this survey out on our behalf. We developed the survey, we worked with Qualtrics, and they sent it out to a representative sample across the United Kingdom. So what this supported us doing was to build to send it to a lot of participants very quickly, and also to a representative sample as well. So we used census data to sample for this survey based on age, everyone being over 65 years old, of course, gender, and as well as geographical representation as well. For example, if there are more older adults living in the northwest of England compared to the northeast of England, then there were more surveys sent to older participants within the northwest of England. And the Qualtrics survey project team would be able to use their survey distribution lists to send these surveys to. So individuals can sign up to survey tools to receive surveys, and then they get paid for each survey that they complete. And then the Qualtrics team, as I say, have this list of people, and they're able to send the survey very quickly to the people on their list, as I say, very representatively. And then as soon as individuals receive that survey, of course, it's voluntary participation. People can choose to participate or not. And if they did, as they got a small financial incentive for doing so. So through Qualtrics, the survey was actually sent to around 800 people. And after initial screening, after the removal of any duplicate surveys or incomplete surveys, 410 surveys were returned to us to analyse for this part of the project. And as I say, the skills were very much informed from the findings from phase 1, and they included questions around the frequency of technology use, reasons for technology use, anxiety towards computers, overall attitudes towards computers, as well as initiation as well. You know, Jess mentioned around social capital and the importance of the social network in initiating technology. So we asked some questions about that. And we also asked some questions about overall technical support as well. So who people would go to if they had any issues with their technology use as well. So they were the skills that kind of captured the technology aspect of people's experiences. But what we also did in this phase was we captured people's self-reported social isolation and loneliness as well. And we did that using two separate skills. We used the love and social network skill and the De Jong-Veld loneliness scale as well. And we combined the scores from both of these scales using a syntax on SPSS, which is a statistical software program. And through both of these scales, we were able to categorize each participant into 4 different categories. We were able to categorize individuals as being both lonely and isolated, neither lonely nor isolated but not lonely, and lonely but not isolated. And then what we were able to do was to compare these different categories to the tech skills that we used in the survey as well. So, you know, how are the experiences of technologies, does frequency of technology use differ depending on if a person self-reports as being lonely or not lonely, isolated but not isolated. So we're able to compare our other skills with these categories as well. And as I say, unfortunately, the analysis is still ongoing and we're not in a position to present this today, but please do keep an eye open. Of course, we'll be publishing these findings and we'll be publicising them on social media. We're really excited about this because this phase of the project will do is to be able to show that relationship between social isolation, loneliness and technology use as well. So at the beginning of this presentation, there were 4 aims, 2 of them being more general and 2 specifically looking at the relationship between social isolation, loneliness and the motivations and reasons for use and the facilitators and barriers. And this phase will specifically be able to answer those questions. And so as I say, please do keep your eyes open for the findings coming out of that phase. So what do our findings mean? So looking at the phase 1 findings again, you know, Jess very much discussed the importance of technology for social connection. And individuals in our study primarily use this technology to maintain meaningful offline relationships with people that they already knew. So this was mainly family and also friends as well. So looking back at the first few slides around the introduction, you know, to the theory around this, we can compare this to the stimulation hypothesis, as the authors of the review suggested that older adults were more so using technology as a way of enhancing their existing relationships, as opposed to displacing their offline relationships with online relationships. So it was used in a more positive way of enhancing those offline relationships, as opposed to that withdrawal. With all online communication, visual communication was of most importance for people, and this was because it was most reminiscent of face-to-face communication. And again, I suppose complements that with the stimulation hypothesis of enhancing those existing offline relationships and using technology in a way that is most reminiscent of being with someone in person. But as Jess said, you know, the most important aspect was that this technology was seen as a tool, a supplementary tool for face-to-face communication, certainly not as a replacement, certainly not as a way of displacing those offline relationships, but of enhancing them. And I think that's why it came across the importance of using technology when social connection, face-to-face connection wasn't available, such as when people were living geographically dispersed, you know, their family and friends were living abroad and they weren't able to see them face to face. So this, you know, communication via technology was the next best thing. The second main theme from our findings was around the biopsychosocial barriers. So, you know, Jess presented the themes and the sub-themes around the facilitators and the barriers to technology use. And what we've done is we use those themes to develop this model, which shows the biological or the physical, the psychological and the social barriers to technology use, specifically for social connection. So within our study, we found that mobility issues, persistent pain, and visual barriers were specific physical factors that impacted using technology for social connection. Psychological barriers included perceived self-efficacy, you know, an individual's confidence in their technical abilities, fear, and that was fear of breaking technology, or fear of privacy and security issues, as well as attitudes towards communication. You know, Jess mentioned the passivity of some people, being more passive on social media or more passive in receiving messages as opposed to sending them. And finally, there were some social barriers as well, and they were around social capital, through initiation of technology and throughout using technology, and as well as culture around communication as well, and how they're perceived, how their perceptions of online communication as opposed to others' perceptions of online communication. And what you can see in the outer circle as well is the more general barriers to technology use, the more general factors of digital exclusion, whereas our biopsychosocial factors specifically represent the barriers to using technology to connect with others socially. And again, I think what's important to reiterate here is that these barriers were experienced by regular technology users. Everyone in our study owned at least one digital device. They used at least one social media application or text messaging application, video conferencing facility, and yet they still experience these different biopsychosocial barriers. And I think, again, that's really important when we're considering interventions, technical interventions for social connection. So I'm going to pass you back now to Jess, who's going to describe a little bit about the implications for COVID.
Thanks, Gemma. So I don't want to dwell too much on COVID, because I think we've all had enough of that by now. And our study was actually conducted before the onset of the pandemic. However, I think you can probably all see how transferable our findings are to this situation. So I would like to comment briefly on this. We know that COVID and the lockdown period has had a huge impact on social isolation and loneliness for many. Over the last few months, we haven't been able to meet up with family or friends, or even going to work. So many of us are relying on technology a lot more than usual. For many, their sole communication will be happening online. I'm sure that more people than ever will be really embracing technology. And perhaps there'll be a bit of a love-hate relationship there given the circumstances. But at least it's something, and it's a way to stay connected, even if it's not perfect. After all, the participants in our study viewed technology as a welcome tool, but it never would replace face-to-face conversations. Now that we are all heavily reliant on technology, it's important to remember that not everyone can get online, and to be mindful that not everyone has the access or the skills to use these technologies. Clearly, we aren't all equally affected by the pandemic, and those without access to technology could be struggling with isolation or feelings of loneliness. For many of our participants, and I suspect many people in general, they rely on their existing social network of family and friends to help in setting up and the continued support of technology. But if you're someone who is socially isolated or lonely, then you may not be able to rely on this support. If you're not that comfortable with technology and will benefit from help, then feeling like you've got no support if something goes wrong could be quite nerve-wracking. I think this pandemic has highlighted inequalities for so many people, and we must remember that this new digital world isn't achievable for everyone. We need to make sure that these people aren't left behind. Additionally, we can use our findings, in particular the facilitators and barriers that we discussed, to think about what types of problems some older adults might be facing during this time, and importantly, we can start to address them. So we've talked a lot about digital exclusion in this presentation, and it's important that we reflect on what can be done to tackle this problem. Digital exclusion is a very real problem, and it has the potential to exacerbate issues of loneliness and social isolation. A number of organisations have been tackling this issue of access during the pandemic. One that comes to mind is Devices.now, which is a fantastic initiative by the Good Things Foundation. And they've targeted digitally excluded households, and these are the households without any access to the internet, and they've provided them with tablets, SIM cards, and crucially, they've also provided them with the support that goes alongside using them. However, as we've covered previously, digital exclusion is much more than simply those who can't get online. Even regular tech users can experience problems. So it's important to remember that barriers still exist and should be factored in the development of any guidance or interventions around using technology for social connection. There's the potential still to widen the breadth of usage for existing tech users and increase their engagement. Our research has found that social capital is really important, and the benefits extend far beyond simply getting started with a device. Therefore, when thinking about interventions around technology use in this population, it's vital to consider providing a network of friendly experts to help, not only with the initial setup, but also the ongoing maintenance. And this is something we can all consider in our own interactions with family and friends, and make a conscious effort to be available to help. And that's it from me, and I'm going to hand back over to Gemma, who will round up.
So of course, there are some limitations to this study and some considerations for future research as well. This study didn't include participants who were digitally excluded, and that was a purposeful decision, but still a limitation to the study. Our findings certainly aren't transferable and can't be generalised to that wider population. There was an absence of diversity in both phases as well, with both phases predominantly involving older adults between 65 and 75 years old, and also most of our participants were white British. So we really would encourage studies with more diversity in the future. Another limitation, especially to phase 2, which we've briefly outlined today, was that of course all of the participants involved in that phase had already signed up to a survey. They'd already signed up to receive these surveys and to be paid for these surveys. It's a very specific sample. And again, our findings can't be generalised outside of that sample. And the aim of phase 1 was to explore the use of technology for social connection. We didn't actually measure loneliness or social isolation in that phase. And our findings around the relationship between technology and social isolation or loneliness specifically come from phase 2. So to conclude, technology was mostly used as a way of maintaining and enhancing existing social connections, very much following the simulation hypothesis. Technology is a welcome tool for social connection, but it was definitely considered as supplementary and not a replacement for face-to-face technology, face-to-face communication, sorry. And finally, older technology users aren't just one homogenous group. Even those with access and skills who we would consider to be digitally included have different biopsychosocial barriers, which we need to consider when thinking about using technology for social connection. So we'd really like to thank the British Academy and Leverhulme Small Grants Research Fund for providing the funding for this research. And of course, we'd also like to thank all of the participants who took time to tell us their stories and who completed the online survey. We'd like to thank Qualtrics for helping us to support phase 2 of this project. And also a little plug for our podcast as well. We'd like to thank Amrita Singh, who was our technical sound expert on the podcast. And we do have a podcast available online at Spotify, SoundCloud and iTunes as well. And what the podcast does is it's the participants' own voices. So the participants within our interviews actually kind of bringing their themes to life, bringing the findings to life. So please do give that a listen as well. And that's it from us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, that was absolutely brilliant. We have a few questions for you at the moment. So Shirley has asked, how were the participants for phase 1 selected?
From phase 1 selected?
Yes.
Our participants in phase 1 were primarily recruited through social media and also through the CADR newsletter and kind of distributed like that. So it was very much a voluntary sample that was advertised through social media and different.
It snowballed a little as well, with a number of our participants sort of recommending the study to their friends from various groups they were involved in. So it was kind of a mixture of us recruiting and then our participants also helping us with the recruitment.
That's brilliant. And then we have another question from Anne. When are the findings of phase 2 expected to be published?
We're hoping for them to be published by the end of the year, early next year at the very latest, but we're very near and finalising those for publication. So hopefully within the next few months.
Brilliant. Angela has a hand up. Are we able to give Angela access through so she unmutes her mic so she can ask her question? Ray?
Sorry, hi. I'm trying to unmute Angela. Hang on, here we go.
Yeah, she's had her hand up for a while. I'm not sure whether she's put it back down now, but
it says self-muted. I can't
okay.
unmute. Oh, I can't unmute her. Sorry. She's just saying she can't get it to work. Let me see if I can change her to a panelist.
Catherine's has asked whether we can put the links to the podcast on the chat, please, so that they can access them. Anyone else has any questions? If you want to pop them into the question dashboard, we can start answering them.
Angela, sorry, Angela, can you try and unmute yourself? It's not letting me. It's saying that you're self-muted.
Is that working?
Yep. Yes, that's right. We can hear you.
Hello. Hello, a fellow Northeasterner here. I just was wondering, in terms of research and design and future technology to facilitate communication between older people and their families, it's something that I've had great experience with in recent times with my mum, and the use of WhatsApp was incredible. The only difficulty was I had to be there for her to use it to then speak to my husband and see my dog. If only there were much simpler devices, you know, a one-button device where people could see each other without, she couldn't use a tablet or a computer, basically.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that is such a barrier, isn't it? And that was what we found. You know, it was even that fear. People were worried that they were going to break something, that they were going to press the wrong button, and it really put people off using it.
Mm-hmm. There's certainly a market, isn't there, for, you know, to devices.
Massively. Tremendously. And I just wondered if you'd heard of anything or you knew anyone that was working in that area.
I've not personally. I don't know about you, Deb or Gemma.
No, I know there's a device called Push to Talk, but I don't think you can. It's got a video facility on it. I think it's more like a phone with just one large button that you can press to automatically connect to somebody in your network. Yeah, so I'm not sure. I haven't heard of anything else.
Okay, definitely a huge marketplace and huge potential. Thanks very much. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Angela.
So
I'll put myself on mute. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a few more questions coming. So Charlotte has asked, what type of interventions do you think could be beneficial to improve older adults' self-efficacy for technology use?
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? I think, it's put us on the spot, that has.
I think it's a lot around the support that you can provide people. You know, I think it's empowering people to feel okay about what they're doing, and I think that's like with everything. I think it's practice makes perfect, and it's sort of not just giving somebody a device to use and then abandoning them. It's kind of supporting them through that process. I think that would be, I know for me, when I'm learning something new, it's nice to have that support that goes alongside the usage. But in terms of,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And it is that maintenance, isn't it? Not just the kind of initiation and the setup, but that maintenance throughout that use as well. And it was really interesting, actually, when we spoke to people, most people that we spoke to got support from their friends and their family or their neighbours. But in the absence of that, people also went to high street shops. I think especially the Apple shop was mentioned quite a lot. And people went to those shops and to speak to people about support there.
We've had a few people suggested in response to, I think it was Angela's question, that there are some technologies, so let me just find them now because they're coming in thick and fast actually. So Matthew, where is he going? Let me find him, sorry, bear with me. Matthew said there's something, is it called COMP? And Donna has said there's a technology called Ethel, which addresses easy contact with family. It's like a large touchscreen tablet. And Felicity wondering whether an Amazon Echo would work because you have to visit video and the one push to answer. I've been working on a bit of a project, or developing a project around Amazon, and I think there are issues there using the Amazon Echo. People are worried about the security and the confidentiality, because it does record certain amounts of certain words. It picks up and kind of keeps a record, and I think older people are a bit wary about using those sort of technologies. So that's something we've been trying to have a look at, to see if we can resolve some of those issues. Just asked whether you've come across the issue of different types of video platform. In fact, the health GPs cannot use all platforms such as WhatsApp and Facebook and FaceTime. And basic issue is professional citizen disconnect.
Right.
Yeah. And he also says about the Wales Co-op provides support for many organisations to give people digital skills. And there are tablets and PCs available that have none of those single buttons. I know in Wales we have the digital communities who have been giving iPads and so forth for care homes and hospitals. Again, it's the work we've done with care homes, again, staff sometimes not that au fait with how they're used.
Yes.
It tends to be younger family members, which I think sometimes has implications if you're aging without children. Who do you then help get to assist you in setting up technology?
Yes. We're working, I'm just going to be starting a research project over the next few months working with war widows. So I am part of the Northern Hub for Veterans and Military Families Research, and we're working specifically with the War Widows Association, because war widows are typically dispersed across the UK, and what we want to do is potentially increase peer support and peer connection between war widows that are members of the association, and by using iPads, and that's something that we're developing, and we're going to be evaluating that alongside the development of that programme to see, you know, looking at initiation, looking at that peer-led support as well, of war widows helping and supporting each other. But again, that'll be really interesting to keep an eye on, to look at how that'll work geographically dispersed, and if that peer support will work using technology. But yeah, that's one to keep an eye on as well.
Alice has asked, often do people share their images and videos as part of their online communication? Were the participants sharing photos that they'd taken, or were they just viewing other people's photographs?
Most of them seem to be sort of viewing other people's photographs, but again, you don't want to put everyone in one group. You know, a number of the people that I spoke to did take photos of, you know, perhaps the pets or whatever, and sending it out to their family and friends. But I would say in the main, it was more about the receiving of the photographs and sort of getting to see what their family members and friends were up to.
Interestingly, a lot of people also spoke about showing the photos of their family to their friends as well, kind of on their own device. So rather than sharing photos of themselves, they would show other people, you know, using their phone screen, and the photos of their friends and family. But it was interesting as to how active or how passive people were, either in kind of sharing that information, sharing photographs, but also using social media as well. And I think a lot of that was due to the experiences of social media. As Jess mentioned, you know, in the themes, it was, some people felt that social media was quite controversial and quite argumentative, and that made them a lot more passive in their own use and not kind of contributing to that argumentativeness.
We've had a question from Pamela. Have you any plans for continuing the research after phase 2?
Yes, definitely. We're definitely hoping to continue with the research, and especially building up their biopsychosocial model of facilitators and barriers as well. So we want to take on both themes and continue that with further research, and then of course looking at the findings that come from phase 2 and developing on that as well. But I think it's such an important area, and I think COVID's really shone a light on that, the importance of technology for social connection, and also kind of in how we can try and address some of those barriers as well to help facilitate people use technology. So yeah, we're very keen to continue the research.
And Catherine's asked to feed into the Welsh Government's loneliness and isolation strategy. We have already discussed that because I sit on the Isolation and Loneliness Strategy Board. So once the papers are published, they will be presented to that group. Miranda has asked, was there a preferred social media platform that older people were using? Was it WhatsApp, Facebook?
Jess, do you want to answer that?
I think that people really preferred WhatsApp, because I think that was sort of they could both message and video call and receive and send photographs. So I felt like that was, it was a place where you could do all of these things, and perhaps that was maybe viewed as a more simpler platform to use. But also lots of the participants were really engaging with Facebook. But again, that was more sort of, a method of sort of seeing what family and friends were up to rather than being particularly active on it.
Right, let's see if we've got any more. I'm trying to keep track of them now. Let's see what we haven't answered. George says there's a technology called GrandPad. Thanks, George. That's an answer to Pamela's question. Jennifer said, thank you for raising the issue about ageing without children.
Yeah.
Any questions coming in that I haven't seen? I don't think so. So we've got somebody saying that there are a social worker and older people's mental health teams that often work with people who are isolated and lonely. And if we decide to continue the research into the non-technology user group, they would be happy to help. Thank you, Pam.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I think we'd be quite happy to take up on that. Fiona said she's aware there are lots of local initiatives in Wales to support older adults, and doing the things have compiled a list of them all. Not that I'm aware of. And I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? There are so many initiatives.
Yes.
Because the Barclays Bank have a digital sort of heroes thing. And it's fine, and very often some of those things are online, so you tend to have to be online to find them in the first place.
Yeah.
Which is a huge issue. But yeah, it would be quite useful if somebody could compile a list nationally, even.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it needs a coordinated effort, I think, especially now since COVID.
Yes.
So yeah. So, any more questions coming in? Anybody else got another question? Not that I can see at the moment.
I think you've covered them at the moment, Deb.
Yeah, I think I have as well. I think there's all.
I mean, if anyone has any more, feel free to email either myself or Gemma, and we can answer them that way.
Or likewise as well, you can always email at CADA, the CADA email account, and we can also pass on to yourselves and Gemma and Jess as well.
Fantastic.
Ray, is there any way the podcast could go on the CADA website so people can?
Yeah, that's what I was asking. Yeah, if you can send me the links when we upload
Fantastic.
the presentations and the clip of this video, we can also put the links there as well. So yeah, if you send them to me, that'd be great. Thank you.
Fantastic.
For people to access them. Right, so if there's no more questions.
Oh, Anne Senator just said she's working on a list for the Swansea area.
Oh, fabulous.
Okay. I think that's it.
Well, if there are no more questions, is there any more coming?
Nothing else at the moment.
Well, if nobody has any more questions, I'm going to thank Gemma and Jess for a fantastic presentation. It's been a real pleasure working with you over this project. I've really enjoyed it. You know where I am if you want any more.
Deb, sorry. Georgia Powell has just said that they were trying to raise their hand for a question. Okay, I'll see if I can unmute Georgie. Just give me a second. Georgie. Georgie, I've unmuted you. Can you able to ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Hi,
Yes.
yes, we can hear you, thanks.
Hi, sorry to sneak in a question right at the end. I just wanted thank you, Gemma and Jess. It was a really interesting and informative talk. I really enjoyed it, so thank you. I wanted to speak really quickly about the question about Amazon Alexas, because we're actually starting a new research project on smart speakers in older adults. I'm hoping to explore things like loneliness and also concerns about security. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to connect with you about that at some point. We also have colleagues in computer science who are developing a kind of proactive version. So it might the Alexa might say something like, "Oh, I see your son has uploaded photos to Facebook. Do you want me to show them to you?" So it's kind of trying to proactively encourage social interaction. So yeah, it'd be great to chat to you about that at some point.
That sounds
and then
brilliant.
I just had another question, because it's something that we've been thinking about a bit at the moment, related to older adults that might have mild cognitive impairment or dementia. I don't know if any of your participants fit into that category, or if you had any thoughts about whether there might be specific issues or for that population.
There wasn't any participants that fitted into that category. I mean, that wasn't an exclusion criteria in any sense, but we're not certain of any participants that did fit into that category. In terms of the Amazon Alexa, though, as well, we did ask specific questions about that in the survey. So actually, it'd be really good to chat to you about that. I don't obviously have the analysis to hand as to know exactly what people's thoughts were on that. But we do have data specifically on the Alexa, which would be really interesting.
Oh, right, yeah, no, it'd be really interesting to chat to you about that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'd be quite interested to chat to you as well, Georgie, because I'm working on a project at the moment with a large care provider that is looking at some tech companies that are looking at something very similar and a plug-in platform to Alexa. So I think it would be quite good to connect and share what we know.
Yes, yeah, definitely. That'd be great.
Great. So if there are no more questions, I don't think so. Just check nobody else got their hand up because I missed that.
It's
No.
just from Catherine Butcher. She just says, very interested in the research Alexa just mentioned. Can you share who this researcher is and institution so that we can follow this? Okay. Facebook. Yep. I said I don't think there's anything.
Muted? Oh no, I don't think I'm muted. Did you mean my research?
No, sorry, George, I was just reading the questions that's coming in. Sorry. No, Deb, I don't think there's any other questions.
Okay, well, if that's the case, I'm going to thank Jeff and Gemma for a great presentation. It's been a real pleasure to work with you on this, and I'm delighted that you took up the offer to come and present. For everyone who's attended, you will have an evaluation form probably in the next week to fill in. If you could fill it in, it just helps the CADIS team make sure that the presentations and webinars that are delivered meet your needs and the subjects and topics that you're interested in. We will put the presentation on the CADA website, as you've heard, along with the links to the podcast. That may take a week or so, wouldn't it, Ray?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll see you all at the next CADA webinar.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.